This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast for the Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here.
Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Hey, glad to have you on board here. Excuse me, I'm still recovering a little bit from my COVID as I explained last week, but I'm feeling much better, thank you. I'm hoping you had a great week, and thanks for participating today in listening to the show. Wanted to definitely take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel. Make sure you're available, ring the bell so you can be notified of any future updates of our podcast. Here is my website. You can certainly visit here to find out what some of the shows that we have. You can just click down here under training, Living the Wildlife podcast shows, and you can see the listing of shows we have here. Knows 2018 all the way almost to the present here. I have these shows organized both in shows and interviews. So if you're interested in some of the interviews that I've done, that's on a different page, and you can see the listings here. I try not to go back and redo shows that I've done before. I will re-interview people, of course, because their life has changed and there may be new things in their company. But in terms of topics, I try not to revisit per se, but so definitely take a look at what we've done in the past. You may say, hey, Stephen, I haven't heard anything about raccoons in a while. Well, it's because I've covered some raccoon stuff, and you can just simply scroll down here. If you don't want to do a look, just remember you can just put a click on the page and then just do a Control F and then type in raccoon, and there you go. There's the first one. You can see there's 4 on this page. Raccoon, best baits for trapping raccoons, and then of course raccoon, roundworm, and roof rats, right? So there you have 4 times raccoons the word raccoon occurred on the particular page. So that's one way to quickly look at that. So I would love to hear from you. If you want to think about a show that you'd like to talk about or raise a question that you have for me, you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. And yes, even criticisms, we'll take that as well. Well, today I wanted to talk about humane or ethical wildlife control. You may say, Stephen, why are we getting involved in this? I mean, who cares? I'm just trying to service my clients and control animals and why are you getting into this animal rights stuff and animal welfare stuff? Well, because it is a growing concern around the country. I mean, even in a state such as mine in Montana, more and more people are raising questions about, is this the best way of managing wildlife conflicts? And you as a wildlife control operator need to have a rationale for the choices that you make when you're managing wildlife. The notion of just using the same old methods that you've used in the past without reflection to see if there's anything better is really getting passé. Our life is getting far too complicated. We are moving far too quickly. And as more and more people adopt a more animal welfare / animal rights view of animals, they are questioning and challenging the older traditional methods that we used to use. So let me pull up my PowerPoint here and discuss this a little bit more in depth here. So let's go back to the beginning. And so we're here discussing animal welfare, basically evaluating the humaneness of control options. And so, as I said, the culture is changing. Here we have the animal pet blessing. I mean, people are having their pets blessed, which is, as a theologian, which is absolutely stupid. But nevertheless, the people get into this sort of thing, and many ministers, unfortunately, are just happy that someone shows up to their church and they're blessing a pet, whatever that means. We have a situation where here in the bottom image, where we have This is a poster or a little card that I found on a sign here in Montana. It says, "Please, please stop killing all the gophers. Save some for the hawks, eagles, and owls. These birds need food too." Now that's here in the state of Montana, one of the most rural states in the country. We're the 5th largest state in terms of land area with only about 1.3 million people. It's staggering. And yet this attitude is beginning to take place. So if you don't think your clients are going to be asking some of these questions, if they're not asking it now, they're going to be asking it later. Is this the most humane method of controlling this particular species? And we have to be careful that our attitudes towards traditionalism, that, oh, I've been using what's always worked. You may be thinking to yourself, well, I don't need to change. I found what works. I don't need to. But that is just too short-sighted, because these people vote and they're going to often be instituting changes. And so what happens is, as wildlife control operators, they'll often have the attitude of, well, this isn't affecting me. This is for you people in New York or California. And I'm just telling you that those people move, and those are the cultural influencers in our country. And as New York and California go, so goes the country. And as we become more and more removed from our environment, people's attitudes towards animals shift, and they're becoming more questioning about the methods that we're using to manage wildlife. Dr. Corrigan, who is one of the leading rodentologists in the world, he's had people in New York City say, yeah, we have rats. Can you help us get rid of them without killing them? Now, that just kind of blows my mind at the stupidity of that. But nevertheless, that's what people are asking him. And you're going to find that you're going to have clients asking you that too. And if they're not, chances are their neighbors are going to be asking you. So are you evaluating your methods to see if they're going to be appropriate for humaneness? Well, other than the animal rights protest industry and some hyper animal welfareists, some people are asking the question on a more environmental level, and they're saying all of these animals have a role to play in the environment, so why are you killing them without justification? Now, this is a more sophisticated argument. They're saying, why stop the slaughter? We need to be doing certain things for animals that maybe there's a less lethal method of managing this, that maybe we're not just going to kill our way to success. So people are asking these questions, and they're saying, maybe we're on a killing treadmill and we need to get off of it. Are you prepared for these types of questions? Are you prepared for your clients asking, is this the best method to do it? And how would you explain that to them? Think about the following two methods we have here. Which tool should you use? You say, well, I'm going to use the humane cage trap. Well, those of you listening to this podcast know that the cage trap isn't necessarily the most humane option. There are situations where the conibear is far more humane than the cage trap. Just consider if you're trapping in the woods, for instance, during deep February, an animal caught in a cage trap, now it may be suffering cold injury if it stays overnight, as opposed to where maybe it would die relatively quickly with a conibear. What if we put the conibear underwater, so when the animal got caught, if the conibear doesn't kill it relatively quickly, being underwater would? Is that going to be more humane than catching it in a cage trap, where it may have to suffer the degradation of cold, and then still have to be killed? Do you see how complicated this is? Do you have a methodology by which you're going to evaluate whether one method is better than another? Or are you just going to guess? As pest geeks, guessing just isn't good enough. We need to be better than that. We need to be thinking about evaluating our methodology. So what are some ways that we can begin to think about and structure our thought about whether one particular method or tool is better than another? Well, some of you are doing this intuitively, but we want to make this a little bit more objective. And so Litton et al. 2004 talk about how all pest control operations involve three things: people, the animals, both target and non-target, and the environment. Whatever methods we're using to do wildlife management, we have got to be thinking about the impact of those methods on those three spheres: people, animals, and the environment. And that certainly makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? And that is, we should be thinking about how will this affect a child? How will this methodology affect my client? How will this affect his relationship with neighbors? How will this affect his public relations? Will this affect his pets? Will this affect his domestic animals? How will this affect the non-target animals? How will this affect the target animals? And then, will I harm the environment with this particular method? Complicated stuff, to be sure. Well, is there something more granular? Well, there is. And in Litton et al., they asked the question, should we evaluating our methodology based on, is it effective? Is it easy to use? I mean, if a method isn't effective, why are we even doing it? Because it's probably causing harm, if nothing else, to our time. Is it safe for human users and those encountering it? This is certainly a question that many of the animal rights activists don't really care about, because they want traps that are going to be able to kill the animal instantly without pain. Well, if you look at some of those traps, they're quite dangerous. And we don't want something that's so dangerous for humans to use that they're being injured. I mean, think of the ram snare. Ram snare is an amazing device. But when you see that puppy go off, boy, you better make sure you're not around it. That is a pretty scary device when I saw that go off. Now, is it certainly going to be more humane than some other devices? I would think so. If it hits the animal properly, that animal is going to be dead before it knows it. But is it safe enough for human use? Is the methodology humane? I mean, a blowtorch may be able to control a particular wildlife complaint, but is it responsible? A flamethrower, is it really, can it work? Sure, it can work, but is it responsible? Is it humane? Probably not. Is the methodology target specific? Is it species specific? Can we make sure we're not harming non-target animals? Because when we're capturing an animal that's a non-target, even when we capture it in a cage trap, we're still harming that animal because we're interfering with its ability to forage and to have self-determination. You probably never thought about that before, but your animal rights people have. Is the technique or methodology safe for the environment? You may have a particular pesticide that works great, but if it's killing all the non-target animals and poisoning the soil, well, obviously that's not going to be very helpful. Is there anything missing in this methodology? You may say, boy, Stephen, that's a pretty thorough methodology. I would say, yeah, it is. I would argue, however, it is missing something, and that is money. What is the economic benefit? And this is something that's frequently overlooked, because if an elderly woman can't afford your quote-unquote humane method, what difference does it make? If she's having to question whether I should buy groceries or pay for your quote-unquote humane method of control, what is she going to do? Well, she want to eat. And this is one of the challenges with the animal rights groups, because they often want to legislate various forms of control and eliminate forms of control because they don't want to think about cost. And I would argue cost is part of the option here. Another way of looking at and evaluating a particular method and using it as a way to compare one control method with another control method is Meller and Reed's 5 domains. The 5 domains are spheres of questions that you're going to ask to determine, and the answers are going to help you determine whether one method is better than another method. And these are the 5 domains. The first one is nutrition. That is the animal's nutritional needs: water deprivation, food deprivation, malnutrition. The second domain is the environment. How is the animal's environment going to be impacted by this particular method? Is there going to be enough space for this animal to live? Or is there going to be habitat for it to live? Domain number 3 is the animal's health. Does the method cause undue disease, injury, functional impairment to an animal? Fourth, how does this methodology impact the animal's behavior? Does it change in other words, sometimes an animal wants to be associated with other animals because they're more corporate species. Well, does your control method interfere with that? So now the animal's experiencing stress because it's been isolated from other members of its tribe, for instance. All 4 of these elements, nutrition, environment, health, and behavior, are in the physical function components. They combine together to impact the 5th domain, which is the animal's psyche. Remember, if you've listened to my presentations on humanness, when we talk about animal suffering, we are talking about the animal's psychological state. We don't have access to the animal's psychological state, so we have to infer it based on its physical elements. But we can see we can see into its mind on the basis of how it's behaving. For example, is it breathless? Is it thirsty? Does it experience pain? Is it sick? Does it have debility? Is it weak? Does it have exhibiting anxiety? If any of you have pets, you know that you know when your pet is off because of the animal's behavior. You're inferring it on the basis of various physical signs. So you're going to use these elements to determine whether one methodology of control is more humane than another. Now again, it's not asking the question of whether there's what's economically viable. I would argue this is part of it. But another element that's missing here, and that is longevity, and that is you may be controlling the behavior of an animal over a short period of time because you check your traps every day. But that's going to have a better humane score than a methodology where you're only checking the animal, the traps every 48 hours. Because the animal may be in there significantly longer. These 5 domains, of course, help us assess control methods. But it doesn't ask the more fundamental question of whether we should be using the tool in the first place. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is sometimes people are asking us the question, not whether this method or not is humane, but whether it is even humane to even begin using the method in the first place. For example, is it really justifiable to kill a garter snake simply because a person can't handle the emotional trauma of a garter snake in its bushes? Does the garter snake really need to lose its life because someone has such a phobia over snakes that they now have to have it killed? Do we really need to kill that Canada goose simply because it's crapping on your grass and for some reason you have to have perfect grass? That's a more fundamental question. Now you may say, well, I never have clients asking me these questions. And I would probably believe you, however, understand that they may have neighbors who are asking this question. I've had clients who are asking, what are you going to do with that animal? And I'd ask them, well, is it any of your business? But more and more people are becoming vocal about whether or not it's justifiable to control this animal in the first place. You need to be prepared for how you're going to answer these questions, because you may have clients beginning to ask those questions as well. Is this the best way? Is there another method? And we as wildlife control operators have not done a good job evaluating ourselves in policing ourselves. 15 years ago or so, in the association I belong to, we had individuals who were involved in doing a lot of one-way doors. And frankly, some of them weren't treated very well when they were arguing on the basis of using one-way doors. And there was a lot of angst and animosity towards them. And, it wasn't physical, but it was emotional. It would be bad-mouthing them or excluding them from the group and talking them down. It was really kind of childish in many ways. Wildlife control industry can be pretty immature. But nevertheless, a lot of wildlife control operators were threatened by these people because they saw them as sort of sellouts to the animal rights groups, and they were thinking that this is going to affect their business. Well, I can assure you that fear was legitimate and is coming. But on the same token, if someone wants to have a business where they're saying, I want to use a less lethal control methods, I want to use one-way doors, I want to try to reduce just killing animals, I may disagree with that personally, but that is a business decision on their part, and that's part of what the market is supposed to do. But we should be asking ourselves the question, do we really need to be killing as many animals as we need to be? As we are? Those are tough questions. And are you asking them? What happens when the legislature comes through and changes the laws in your state that eliminate certain forms of methods of control? What are you going to do then? When I was in Massachusetts and I lost the ability to use conibears, it impacted my business substantially. Was I prepared for it? Not as much as I probably could have been. And some of these things can happen faster than you think. And then people start crying, well, why isn't the National Association helping me? Why isn't this group helping me? And then they start bawling and wondering why they don't have better political action. If we're not policing ourselves, or if we're not evaluating our own work, don't be shocked when this gets hit, when you get blindsided by it. So let's look at this list again. Are you evaluating your goals, and are you aware of the harm that your methods use? Do you undertake control only if the goals are achievable, or do you work for people who have goals that are simply not achievable? Is that ethical? Does that make you a humane wildlife control operator? I've talked about this notion of where wildlife control operators use this word humane as a sort of to get the halo effect for their company, but when you really look at it, their businesses are not humane. And that sooner or later, their clients are going to realize that they've been deceived, maybe lied to, or maybe your definition of humane is a whole lot different than their definition of humane. Are you using only the most effective methods? And I would probably put in there legal methods, right? Sometimes the most effective methods aren't legal because your state has banned them. Are you applying those methods in the best way? Sometimes we focus so much on the method and the tool, we didn't think about how those tools and methods are implemented. There's a human component to wildlife control. Someone who has good experience with a foothold may be more humane to an animal than a person who's not experienced with a cage trap. Are you evaluating your work, and are you assessing your work? Are you thinking about ways of making your control methods more humane? For example, something as simple as putting an sliced apple in with traps that are capturing flying squirrels, for instance, can help them maintain moisture, or even red squirrels. Is it really that big of a deal to put an apple in there, or to put some sort of water source in there for them? Is that a big burden? That could really make reduce the stress of that particular caught animal? Are you maintaining those goals when they're achieved so that you're not reinventing the wheel again and having to start all over in a massive killing campaign? These are important questions. They're not simple questions. And you may say, boy, Stephen, you've really left my head spinning here. Well, let me try to break it down for you again. I just want you to take away at least these three elements. How does your control affect your people, both customers and non-customers and your workers? How does your control methods impact the animals that you work with, both target and non-target? And then lastly, how do your control methods affect the environment? Think about those three domains. At least you're starting the process of self-evaluation in terms of your control methods. So when the client asks you, are you using the most humane methods, you can give them the comparison contrast without getting too far into the weeds with them, but at least helping them understand that these issues are complex and require context. Well, you've been listening to Stephen Vantassel, Living the Wildlife, as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. I do hope you've been challenged by this presentation, and we talk about ethics of control and about the humaneness of our methods and some questions to ask to evaluate those. Would love to hear from you. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Ideas for future shows, yes, even criticisms, or if you have someone that you would like to have me interview, I would love to get your suggestions on that. Of course, you can always visit me at wildlifecontrolconsultant.com. You have there are various books and publications there that you can also take advantage of and expand your knowledge and reading. And also some training opportunities that you can look for there as well. Again, this is Stephen Vantassel. You've been listening to Living the Wildlife. Why do we call it Living the Wildlife? Well, because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everyone. And don't forget, think about how you can be more humane this week. Take care.